All right, are we started now? Okay. So our group 1 had psychoeducation, and what we discovered as we were going through this is that there was no starting point for what is ADHD. So we broke that down into symptoms, epidemiology, prognosis, differential and comorbid diagnoses, and treatment. And maybe we'll go around and discuss some of these things. We kind of skipped over symptoms. I think everybody knows what the symptoms of ADHD are, but we'll talk a little bit about some of the epidemiology that we give to, or psychoeducation that we give to parents.
And one thing on symptoms, I have one handout that I will share that's from the PCAT manual that basically just explains that the symptoms, which can seem like a lot of misbehaviors, like interrupting and, fidgeting and not sitting down when they're told to, and things that just seem like bad behavior, are ADHD behaviors. And so it kind of explains to parents that this is part of the ADHD. And we talked a little bit in the epidemiology about talking about how ADHD is brain-based. It's not something that kids do on purpose or that they always necessarily have control over. So I think that was an important thing we discussed. Did you have other, you want to go to about prognosis?
Sure. All right, so in terms of prognosis, some of us, we talked about how we will directly mention that it's neurologically based diagnoses and how that sort of develops. Yoni got very specific and talked about 1/3, and I don't even think I remember exactly how that went. Oh, that's the course and cohort. Oh, okay, well, never mind. But then so just mentioning how it changes like developmentally over time in terms of prognosis, but I don't know if you...
Yeah, so what we found is that, so we had 2 psychiatrists in the Yoni and Nurali in our group, and what we found is that what we said was pretty consistent with what they said, which is great, I think, and our assumption is that if we were saying the same things that they were, that is probably pretty consistent amongst our entire group. So just very, very briefly reviewing that, we'll talk a little bit about, because we get tons of questions like, is this going to be forever from parents, right? So we'll say, oftentimes because of brain development, the hyperactivity may decrease. However, oftentimes that inattention may linger just because of the way our brains develop. I will sometimes even talk about, the frontal lobe and how, it continues to develop until we're 30, and then after that it starts deteriorating. And parents are usually like, what? And then the kids, are into the conversation as well, because they're like, haha, looking, laughing at their parents. But part of that is all, related to that executive functioning. And then I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that. Yoni was talking about very specific, I think 1/3 of kids grow out of the hyperactivity, 1/3 of kids are completely in remission, and I think 1/3 of kids have both inattention and hyperactivity for the rest of their, something along those lines.
Inattention, and then those that remain with disruptive behaviors.
Like conduct disorder.
He did not.
Okay. That sounds like a great, just everything that you described in terms of the course of of development sounds like great information to put in a handout to share with families.
We can certainly create one.
Yeah.
We didn't have one specifically.
He called it the rule of thirds, so I'm assuming it's like a thing that he could, I think it sounded more official than just something he
Would you mind exiting out and maybe typing that on
the rule of
this slide
thirds?
or the next one,
Sure.
so that we can remember when we collate the slides? I don't know if you have a second, but if we can just ask about.
The minutes.
Oh, awesome.
I would also like a handout that talks about the different kinds, like visually the fact that it's ADHD, it's not ADD, and that there's 3 different kinds.
Oh yeah, we didn't put
Does
that.
anybody have a handout like that?
I don't know.
Or or is anybody interested in volunteering to make?
So I've never used a handout because I just said that so briefly that as soon as I said it, they get it. And I find I give the handouts when it's like I cover something and they may not remember or may not understand it the first time, and they can go back and read over it. But usually when I say here are the 3 different subtypes, they immediately understand. So that's why I personally just haven't used a handout for that.
Could you put in 3 subtypes for everything appropriate for symptoms?
While Teresa's doing that, I mean, so just to cover this slide, so here's a couple things. So through the C. Meyer Child Mind Institute, if you sign up with your email, they have a parent's guide to ADHD, and they cover all of these main points that we're covering here, and a lot of the typical questions that parents ask. I think they seem to really focus at home when they're playing their video games. Like, why can't they focus on their schoolwork, related to medication, things like that.
Related.
Unfortunately, they don't have this in Spanish. I tried to get it, but it's not available. But yeah, so you can download it as a PDF. I'll pass this around. And then I usually get actually the NIMH Spanish one. But this one is also in Spanish. It's through the National
The handout. Okay. Okay. So the Child Mind Parents Guide to
So
ADHD.
if whoever, I guess you'll be the last person to look at the handouts, if you could just leave them at the end, then that way we'll be able to collate. We're going to collate them all by the section. So these are all the psychoeducation handouts. These are all, so then you kind of know that's group 1. So we're going to just let those go around before we pass out the next round so they can stay together. That was great.
Okay. For differential and comorbid diagnoses, I think we also get the misconception from a lot of teens, especially, and parents, that ADHD means you're stupid, or you have special education needs, and so then I'll often make that differential very clear. Very briefly, with treatment, everybody is familiar with the MTA study. Does everybody talk about medication the first time they're talking about ADHD treatment? Okay, so that was actually, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, as like only healthy steps, and I know there's a few others, I have worked with Yoni on a few cases where they're like 3 or 4 or 5-year-olds that were thinking about medication, and so have learned from him that American Academy of Pediatrics recommends behavioral treatment before medication. So that's usually information that I share with families, and that they can, that once we see how the behavioral treatment, like a trial, goes, then medication is an option. And then also, obviously, if there's like safety concerns, that's a different issue. So I'll usually give that information. And then, we talked about the MTA study, that combined is best, and then the outcomes for having treatment, that there's greater long-term, the outcomes long-term are better in terms of, mood outcomes and relationships and career and all of that. So just like trying to encourage families to consider treatment seriously.
Weird question, I don't know if this is right. I had thought that the study had said that combined was equal to meds alone.
So, yes, and they recommended the combined, it's equal in terms of the core ADHD symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. However, they recommended the combined behavioral therapy and medication because this better addresses all of those secondary symptoms that come with ADHD. So the mood symptoms, some of the social skills nuances, some of the parent-child relationship issues that can come up. And so that's actually why I end up bringing it up my first time. Like anytime I am diagnosing ADHD, I'm already just at least putting medication on the table so that the parent is aware that I may be bringing it up again later. I know I saw some heads shake, and so I'm sure that's, stylistic and up for discussion as well.
There's also some newer studies that the medication sometimes decreases in effectiveness over longitudinal time. So there's actually some reanalysis of that study question as to whether or not they decided they were equivalent too quickly.
And I usually talk about like that the behavior strategy can be really good, and if they're still having difficulty, kind of makes sense because you can't go with your kid to school and sit next to your kid and use those things. And so if they're still having difficulty, that's when we found it.
Yeah.
And I mentioned middle school, but at the time where, I mean, if you're doing okay at elementary school, that's great, but let's wait till classes change and all that other stuff is happening, so you may want to revisit this with them.
We bring that up, actually.
Thank you, Anjali.
You're welcome.
So we also continue to talk about what role do parents have, and we talked about specifically, obviously, there's a handout too that went around, courtesy of Christina from PCIT, specific behaviors that parents model for their children. That's also where I mentioned like being patient and things like that. We also talk about that the medication obviously isn't going to solve everything, and that they still need to be there for their kids and to help to provide that support, especially around executive functioning. Related to that, on Anjali's point of those different developmental periods or transitional periods. So like, yes, they were doing great in elementary school, but now middle school we have multiple teachers, we might have lockers, and where parents might think they're older, they should get this now, like, I'm done with this. And same thing for high school, but just knowing that those are periods and planting those seeds that they need to provide additional support for them.
Anchorman. Oh, okay. There's a handout going around that I think it's two-sided, or I think it's stapled, but it's supposed to be two-sided. And one side talks about parents modeling behaviors for their children, and then the other side talks about anger management. And I think, a lot of the parents that we work with have some of the ADHD symptoms, and so sometimes it can, be even more important to talk about managing that. Yes, Eliza.
I think that also sometimes in terms of psychoeducation, especially with a really little one, I'll say they're 2 or 3 or 4, and a lot of the issues that they're seeing are in school, but not at home. I always bring up, especially if they're a kid that's born like in October, November, December, like just, are they ready for school? School readiness, right? Like, is this somebody, speak to the teachers? Do they think that he may benefit from repeating a grade or, a different educational type of setup? Because a lot of times parents don't know that, like, school could be really difficult for a little kid, and schools these days expect a lot out of really little kids.
Yeah.
So kind of bringing up school readiness and different maturational variables that are needed and things like that can kind of be eye-opening to parents as well.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about, I know Yoni talks about like the fit between like an environment and what the expected behaviors are. So obviously, like if kids are expected to sit for hours at school versus like a school where they're allowed to have a little bit more mobility or a little bit more choice, that they're gonna, the ADHD behaviors are gonna look worse if the expectations are like somewhat unmanageable for that child, disposition. And then I always talk about parenting fit for behaviors. So, you might have 3 kids, one has ADHD, that child needs a different type of parenting. It's nothing that the parent is doing wrong, it's just that the specific parenting behavior has to fit the child's behavior to have the best outcomes. And I think that usually makes sense and makes it a little less like blaming. Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As we just transition to the next group, were there any additional questions or comments for group 1? All right, so can group 2 please come up? And this is again a recording mic, so whoever's speaking, if you could please hold it.
I'll type.
Okay. Who brought up the mindfulness one? Why don't we start with,
I won't type, you type.
yeah, I think, Erica, do you want to speak to the mindfulness? Because okay. I could talk. I'll start talking. So we actually found it, our process was interesting because we found that we kind of were, the way that we were sort of like, I guess labeling in a sort of a meta way and organizing for ourselves the things that we do kind of differed. And so we were sort of thinking about, and we're really still in the process of, I would say, trying to kind of figure out how to sort of put everything in that we were thinking about in a way that made sense to all of us, and that we're kind of labeling things in sort of a consistent way. Some of the things, a lot of the things were already there that we do, and I would say that, I think mainly the things were on the second slide, right, that we added?
What did we,
We did a little bit of tweaks on this one. But
Okay.
what did we do?
So some of the main things that we sort of added to what was already there, mindfulness was one, and I think let me hand this off to someone else to talk more about this. I could speak a little bit about it if you'd like, and then I'll start it off, and then if one of you want to. But basically, we talked about the fact that mindfulness. There's been more research showing that that mindfulness and practicing that, and we were thinking of practicing it not only on an individual level but also on sort of like a family level, is something that has been shown to be helpful for kids who have ADHD. And we talked about ways of specifically doing that, the ways that we do that in our practice at BHIP, including using different techniques and engaging them with the five senses. We talked about apps, including Headspace as an example, as ways of incorporating mindfulness-related techniques into that.
Speak more add a little bit.
Yeah.
So I guess the idea is that there's been research that the core practice of tuning in to your five senses and slowing down your body and having those kind of quiet, mindful moments not only helps with emotional regulation, but it can also help improve your attention span and reduce reactivity. So there's a famous quote, I can't remember who said it, but essentially that mindfulness helps to increase the space between the stimulus and the response. So giving you a little bit more time, hopefully, to think through, kind of at least pause and read the room before you say or do whatever you were going to say or do. So here we were talking about incorporating it as a family practice for younger kids. There's like a Sesame Street app that Eliza was talking about. But there's kind of ways that you can all sit together. For older kids, some of us that had really good success with giving them, the kids and the parents, apps that you can download onto your phone. And I always say use the free version, but it guides you through doing different mindfulness exercises. And that way, some of us were saying we're not necessarily trained or comfortable in educating families regarding mindfulness. The app does it. Right, so you just have to kind of give them the resource. Yeah.
Is it possible that you could exit out and type the apps that you were talking about so we have them?
Sure.
So then that way, when we go back to the slide, folks can just know that app. Yeah.
Well, breathe, think, do.
Is there anything else to say on that topic? I don't think so.
One of the other sort of big things that when we were looking wasn't there, and maybe actually after we do this, we can kind of go back and show just what we're talking about, what we've added, but we should also show what was there before as well, because there's a lot of things about affect regulation, there's problem solving skills, communication skills that's on there, and basically various kinds of forms of behavior management. And one of the things that was missing were strategies that are specific to hyperactivity and strategies that are specific to distractibility. And one of the things that when we pass around materials, one of the things that we'll be passing around are different kinds of worksheets. Some of them you've seen that specifically speak to strategies that parents can be using both environmentally in the ways that they interact with their children, and just in terms of setting up schedule, routine. We really just kind of, this is where we sort of had the most, this is where we wished we had another half hour to be able to kind of think about how to incorporate it in a way that speaks to what we do without getting too detailed, and be able to sort of categorize and not have things in more than one place within the sort of larger flow of how the slides go. But I'm sorry,
I
please.
think like this particular category, the parenting family level techniques, is so big, and where at least for me, the bulk of my work often is. And so even going back to the slide that was originally in. Like, there's so many different ways I'm sure all of us can go through all these skills that kind of brainstorming in this amount of space, we just got caught up a little bit. But that's all that I'm...
Yeah. So, and just to kind of go through what was already there, you have the affect education, anger management, as we said before, the problem-solving skills, communication skills, these different techniques that are on there to increase positive behaviors and decrease negative behaviors, and there's a lot of different kinds of things there in terms of reinforcement and commands, interventions for older kids. One of the other categories, and actually maybe now's the time to sort of add this, and we could even add it, I think it was something we were saying we should really add at the beginning, which is to talk about the relationship and making sure that parents are sort of focusing in on building a positive relationship with their kids, which is really at the core of all the other techniques.
Yeah, so I was talking about feeling some frustration when working with older, really more the older adolescents who, and when it's more on the disruptive behavior side, and feeling like the strategies that we have listed here, once the kid is really out of control, we're really just a drop in the bucket. That's when it kind of feels like it's beyond BHIP. And so what we ended up going back to was like taking it back to that, that relationship between the parent and the child, and trying to support reconnection there. And those are cases that ultimately may end up in long-term, or we might be putting kind of different pieces together. But I think that's one of the things to think about with this model is like, who's it appropriate for, and making those clinical decisions like we do every day. Does anyone have anything else to add? Mm-hmm. Anybody? No. Anybody?
Here.
Whether we want to organize parenting and family level techniques as like symptom categories, or just general stuff that then people can apply as needed to various symptoms.
And one other thing to add to that is that there's also, of course, the school kind of interventions that we do, like the things that we might send to the school as similar types of strategies. And is that I don't know if that's on. Is that on here as a?
Originally, but we added it.
We added.
Yeah, but it's not just advocacy. It's also, and I don't know if this is beyond parenting family level techniques, if it's its own school level techniques, but that might be something to also think about.
While we transition, does anybody have any questions for group 2, or did you all have handouts?
Yeah.
Paul has.
I could pass around.
I wasn't in the group, but I have a book, Yoga with Kids. It's really helpful. Or you just want to take a picture of it or whatever to fit with the mindfulness part.
Yeah, let me be clear on that too. If you have a handout that's more appropriate for a different group than the one you were assigned to, please feel free to share that. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. Thank you, Kate.
Oh, yeah. I know.
All right, you have about 10 minutes. Thank you. I'll give it a round of applause for group.
Alba, don't you move so far away. Okay, so we decided to break it up. The more we started talking, we spent the first part of our time together just brainstorming, talking about it, and it became clear to us that we have somewhat different focus and techniques for individual level based on age. So we tried to just divide it a little bit for the younger kids and the older kids, not with like a clear cutoff, but just, based on what you're feeling in the room. So come on guys, come on over. For school age, the first step we really wanted to focus on identifying and labeling emotions. So helping these kids get in touch, which is really related to mindfulness. So helping these kids get in touch with how they're feeling, what it feels like in their body, what their warning signs are of when they're starting to get upset. And then related to that, we want to help them have some coping skills and ways to calm down, especially for the kids that are like more disruptive in class and things like that. So deep breathing, making a coping list, having one for home, one for school, because there's different options, that sort of thing. Someone want to do the next one? Yeah.
I think what we discuss is the use of visuals. So in the room, obviously most of us have posters with feelings, so kind of to make it a routine whenever you have the child in, to identify what they're feeling at the beginning of the session and also at the end after you do an activity. And then I'll go into the next one. I use particularly a poster called Whole Body Listening, and it was part of a curriculum of social thinking developed by Michelle Garcia Winner, and it was developed really to work with kids in the spectrum, but a lot of the children in the spectrum have hyperactivity, and a lot of the kids with hyperactivity have a lot of social interpersonal difficulties. So it's a poster that is very helpful, and it's basically, I have a little picture of it. It's a little kid, and I kind of go with the kid and train him in the session to listen with the eyes, the ears, put the hands in yourself, put in the body, and keep in the session, keep reinforcing it with the parent. So at the same time, you kind of you model it for the parent, but throughout the session, are you listening with the whole body? Are you listening with your eyes? And print a little poster, black and white, or if you have color printer, and put it in the fridge at home, so they also at home keep it in mind. So this is, you do it with the kid and you do it with the parent too. Sure.
The next one? Yeah. So with developing specific behavioral goals using positive reframing, we had a couple of thoughts on this. One is thinking with kind of the kids with ADHD, there's a lot of no, don't, behave, stop, yada yada, especially behave. I've found I have kids all the time who come in, I need to behave, and they have no idea what that means. So usually we'll work to operationalize that. What does it mean to behave? Where does the teacher want you to, are you supposed to stay in your seat? Like having them really come up with what behave means, and then really practicing those different skills in session. And then we were talking a lot about, as you guys discuss, kind of the self-esteem and trying to help kids think about like what to do and what is good that they're doing and how to use the energy in a positive way, instead of it just always feeling kind of negative. You had more on that, right?
Yeah, that a lot of kids with ADHD have very poor self-esteem, and as we were saying, the negative is constantly reinforced to them. So identifying that there's positives in having a high energy level as well. You can accomplish a lot if you sublimate it in the right way. So finding activities, sports, different things where they can really use that energy in a way that they're reinforcing that they can do something positive with it.
You want to problem something? Quickly on the operationalizing behavior, sometimes, and this is more of a school thing, but I'll talk to a kid about picking one thing to work on that week, so it's not just behave overall, but like your goal for this week is to try to like only get up twice or whatever it is, and really practice that specific behavior so it's not so overwhelming and taking a kid who's all over the classroom and telling them just behave.
Yeah. It gives them a chance to succeed too, right? But we want the school and the parents to be on board with that too. Then the other thing we talked about was problem solving skills. So helping these kids, the thing that I generally use is the stop, think, do. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but yeah, helping the kid have an idea of before you act, let's stop. Let's think about all of our options, and then helping them to start to brainstorm. So I really go into options that there's no good or bad, right? Like I want you to think of all the things you could do in this scenario. Yeah, you could kick him right in the shin, all those things. And then thinking through what are the things that happen next if you do that, right? Well, I'm gonna have to sit down for the rest of recess. I'm gonna go to the principal, whatever it is. And then helping them make the choice of, in that moment, what's the best behavioral option for them. And I really try to use examples from the past week, so maybe a situation that didn't go so well, let's rewind and kind of think about what are our options to help them slow down. Similar to mindfulness, it really goes along, help them slow down in that moment, look at their choices, and then make the best one for them. Communication.
We didn't have much on communication.
Yeah. I think it goes along with thinking through your options, right?
Right.
Like, how do you tell the teacher if someone's
right? And that can take some practice too. If you're struggling with something, just how to ask for a break, or which not a lot of kids do, but sometimes, or explain that too many things are going on at once.
I think I just click it.
I think so.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Then with the older kids, we will do some more. Sorry, this one we didn't finish.
We didn't have a lot of time.
Our time management was not great. With the older kids, we'll discuss more like actual organizational skills and time management. So I'm, like we talked about, being big into kind of chunking work. So I have a lot of kids who come in once they're at essay grade level, where that's really overwhelming. So, okay, like, let's practice how we would plan this out. Tonight you're going to write your first 2 paragraphs and tomorrow your next 2, or getting practice of like writing out all of their homework first, and things that can just help make that really big overwhelming task into smaller chunks. So a lot of times we'll practice that with kids and maybe do it in session and teach, this goes to the parents, sorry, group 2, teach the parents how to do it too, but then also get the adolescent kind of in the practice of doing that for their own other things.
I feel like also along with this, right? Like, these teens have the benefit, they're way better at technology than we ever are. So like having them use their expertise to actually help them out, right? Like, so how would you remember that you have this appointment with your teacher after school? You know, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I use Google Calendar all the time. So maybe that they haven't used it before. Maybe there's something else they use. Helping them to really think through what are the ways that they can take charge of some of the activities in their life. And the older they get, I think you can really get some buy-in, right? You want more independence. You don't want mom on your back screaming about you because you didn't go and do that thing. What can we do? How can we help you be able to do this, so you don't get that? Yeah.
One other time management thought, and again, it depends kind of where the teen is at and the family, but sometimes that homework does seem overwhelming, so we'll kind of either pick a time to start homework or say, like, okay, I only want you to work for an hour a night. Like, you can set a timer so it doesn't feel like, oh my God, I have all this homework and it's endless and I'm never gonna finish, but kind of saying, like, let's break this down to a really do you think you could work 4 hours? No. Okay. Do you think you could do like 30 minutes and take a break and then another 30? And usually they'll hit a number where they feel like it's totally reasonable. And so we'll at least just start there, right? Because a lot of times they're doing nothing. So it's like, can you at least try half an hour of homework tonight? What would that look like? When would you do it? Okay, you do it after dinner. Where would you do it? And really having them go through all the visuals and make a plan and then share it with the parent of like, okay, Jaden's going to start his homework at 5 and he's just going to do it until 5:30 and then he can take a break, so that it's already predetermined and there's not as much like figured out.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about, in school you don't have a lot of options. Everybody kind of has to, sit at the desk and the desks are all the same. But at home, some parents might be able to kind of figure out a standing desk for kids with ADHD because it helps with the fidgeting. It kind of helps them focus. And studies have shown they're very beneficial for kids that have those kinds of problems.
Yeah. And reducing stimulation, right? Like, you got the kid and they're 15, they've got their phone there, they're doing the snap, they're doing like something else. And just having an honest conversation, right? Being like, yeah, I do it too. And sometimes when I have to do something, I got to put my phone in the other room because I'm going to be texting with my friends and doing it, and helping them just really think through. And I often try to get buy-in by preparing for college. Right? Like, you've got mom yelling at you here, but next year or in 2 years, it's just going to be you. So this is just thinking about what are some real things that you can do to get it done so you can go and have fun and do what you want to do.
Do you all have any experience, and I've only heard about these things, I don't have any specific tools, so it's truly a question. You know how they say there's something about an app that can lock out other, like, social media or like something? Have you all used that at all in practice? Because that feels very ADHD, like, management.
There's one called Grow, I think it's called.
Grow?
I think Katie knew about it.
Can you
It's an app where, like, you're causing like a tree to grow, and if you go out of it, the tree dies.
It's called Grow?
I think it's called Grow.
Grow.
I just talked about this with a kid recently, the past couple of weeks.
I think Katie had some.
One of them is Freedom for iPhone, and there's another one for Android that I can share. I explained it to them, so it does it what it does.
Do you know the name of it?
It's a content, but then once the block is released, it loads everything. So the adolescent doesn't miss anything. There's just like a designated amount of time where no matter how many times they check it, it's going to be no new information.
You can also do not disturb.
And that's how you get buy-in. I found that those I get buy-in from both.
Like when you're driving.
I like that. They still get to see it, because I think the lockout is kids are like not trying to hear that.
Yeah.
But if they would go to and it wouldn't give them the right number until a certain time. And what's the name of that one?
One of them is Freedom for iPhone, and the other one is for Android, and I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called AppBlock, but it's not like, it just doesn't load content.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
I'll also, oh, sorry, I couldn't hear if you were talking. On the, what did you say? Oh, on the iPhone, I mean, they have to use this, but you can put it on Do Not Disturb, where the phone just won't alert you of anything for a while. So sometimes we'll talk about just like try an hour or not even 20 minutes where you do that, so they're just not getting dinged.
What's the name of that app?
I don't remember, but I will email it. I have them all in my office.
So we'll have this on the iDrive, so when you find it, you can just add it into the iDrive.
One correction, it's not Forest, it's called Forest instead of Grow.
Like trying to break it down into different sections of paragraphs, so breaking down assignments into smaller assignments, setting a timeline.
Forest.
Grow Forest? All right, I'll keep that in mind. Just Forest, not called Grow? It's called Forest. Grow is not an app. Okay.
Forest?
I'm sure it is an app.
I'm sure it is.
I never got it, which is fine. Never got past one.
Forest. And then what did you say? Anjali.
Just put her name next to the breaking down larger assignments.
Okay, Anjali. Oh, and I spelled Forest.
Anjali's gonna break down the larger assignment. Now it's one more thing. I thought we had.
I have a handout that I'll pass around, like some handouts that have sensory activities. So like things that, there's one that's game called like rolling a brain break, and you can like, if you're doing your homework or something and you feel like the kid's too fidgety, they need a break, you can use dice and then it will tell you like based on what you roll, what activity did, like you do 10 jumping jacks and then like you come back. And so it's kind of like a way to take little breaks, but it makes it a little more fun. And then there's literally like hundreds of like heavy work sensory activities that kids can do when they're feeling
Group 4?
Ooh, I like that you said that.
Group 4?
You said that. You can pass that around, and I don't know if there are any other resources that are coming down the pipe, but
There are some that are around.
Group 4?
I'm downloading Forest.
Yeah. You talk. You did.
Somebody take it.
I wrote it. You start. Annie, go for it. Wait. Something else too. Okay.
All right. Round for 3.
Our other group 4 member is right there, Laura. Maybe Laura can start with the school piece.
Yeah.
Do you want to start with the school piece?
And we should include what
Okay,
she meant.
so we had coping ahead and ways to sort of anticipate barriers to progress as you get towards the end of treatments. And one of the first things that we are going to talk about is how to support success in school moving forward.
So providing education on what that might look like in the future, like kind of reinforcing some of people's other points about what it might look at different developmental levels, and providing very specific recommendations. You can't really trust the school-based support team to be there, so if you had individualized specific recommendations for the child, documenting them and teaching the parent how to follow up with them, like letting them know what the difference between a 504 and an IEP is. Like a 504, a school can just disregard it because they're supposed to try their best to do it, but they don't necessarily have to. And you can request an IEP, and also they have to be done every year. And an IEP carries throughout until it's done, and so you might want an IEP just to have your recommendations, like if you want them to have directions read to them, anything like that you can put in the IEP. Also getting copies of the current IEP, if there is one, and reviewing it and making sure it's appropriate going forward. There's also a really great reference for parents if you're not, obviously you're not going to be there to guide them. It's Include NYC. It's a website you can go to. They have all kinds of parent IEP trainings. You can watch a webinar on how to get inclusive technology. It's basically your guide to get everything you need. Advocates is really for when you're not getting what you need, but Include will tell a parent how to ask for it in the first place.
And then along those lines and back to the IEP, what I've found is oftentimes with these cases, I'm walking them through the entire process from the letter to the history, and all of that, and helping them advocate for themselves. And at the end, when there's finally this finished product, I find that it's very worthwhile to spend a lot of time walking through the report, reviewing it, because I found that oftentimes the families don't, no one really even told them what's in these, what are the recommendations, what were the findings of the assessment. So we really slowly walk through that and make sure that everybody in the family understands. And then something for relapse prevention, another thing that I found in my practice here is that a lot of times when I'm trying to figure out a quiet space and environment for the child to work in, that becomes quite a challenge because, space is small, there might be lots of kids and adults in the apartment, and a lot of times adults are getting home at night after a long day's work and they just want to turn on the TV, zone out while the kid's doing homework, but of course the TV's blasting and other people are on their screens. So I've found that it's been really helpful figuring out a plan that works for everybody where that child actually does have that quiet space, and then at the end of treatment I like to review that to make sure that all the family members are still on the same page about that. Yeah.
I've been using a lot, apps for that too, like Deep Baby Sleep, where you can kind of deep baby sleep.
Deep baby sleep?
You can put, either the waves crashing on the ocean, or like the sound of a blow dryer, a vacuum cleaner.
Oh.
And you do that, if there's a TV going on in the other room, you just kind of put that on. Make sure the phone's not near the kid doing homework. But whatever it's on, make sure that that's not
the white noise
itself. But using white noise has been a big theme in a lot of my, just for a lot of different things, including this. I bring that up a lot.
Yeah, there's an app called White Noise that I
White
use
noise, yeah.
often at Wade.
White noise. Does anybody else want to?
Sure.
Okay.
And in talking about, when we're trying to prevent, reducing the risk of the child, incurring the same behaviors again, we're trying to adjust behavioral charts, right? A lot of time we have really good success and we're working really well with routines, behavioral charts, reinforcers, and we want to make sure that the parents know that they need to adjust with time, right? That we need to adjust the reinforcers, that we want to start phasing out the actual visual right after a while, so that they know that there might be some changes, right, that they need to adjust.
Like medication pieces, the consistency in your prescription.
And maintaining we're talking about maintaining the consistency in what we've been working on, the strategies. Sometimes it's difficult for them to continue what we've been talking about when we're not there, and giving them that prompter that, we're not going to be there, but you can continue providing that support, maintaining consistency with medication, with the disciplining strategies that we've provided, that we've talked about, and that has already been working for them.
We're also talking about how a lot of parents are very eager for their children to outgrow ADHD and to not decide on your own that they've outgrown it, because a lot of times it's common, they're doing well in elementary school, they're getting over, they're older, they go to middle school, they tank. Advising them to get consultation before you decide they've outgrown it.
And then just a couple of other things. This was just sort of a brainstorm session, sorry guys, so it's a little like a long run-on sentence. But two other things to think about. One, sort of developmentally, preparing a family in advance for potential regressions when stressors or changes happen in the child's individual system or the whole family system itself. You move to a new school, you have a different teacher, there's an illness in the family, etc. So anticipating that and planning ahead for how to continue with these kinds of strategies, or go back to stuff that you had to use at the beginning of treatment that you don't have to use right now because your kid has become very comfortable with it, but keep that in your back pocket, and that regression is normal in that instance. And then another thing was planning ahead in advance for a structured activity that is self-esteem boosting and energy releasing. If it's an athletic thing, if it's drama, dance, any, debate, like who have science club, like whatever you want to do that their kid is interested in, but that helps a little bit with that sort of social skill piece and self-esteem piece and builds in some structure. And I guess that says for us, so add whatever you have. Summer plans. Yep.
Any questions for group 4?
Any additional things for group 4? Or
I would say just add summer/vacation.
Summer/vacation. Even weekend.
That's true.
Anything else? Okay.
Do you have any resources? Does anyone have any resources for relapse prevention? Well, yeah, I think sharing that would be great. I didn't look at this slide for everyone. Did anyone add anything to this slide in their groups? No?
Sorry, I didn't add anything, but one thing I was just thinking about, especially when there was conversation about what would the adolescents with the older kids, is Ross Green's collaborative problem solving.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Hey. Do you have a website or anything, or I'll just put it there? That's Google.
I will add Ross Green now because there
Is it Ross Green like that?
Yeah, it's awesome.
All right. So next step, I'm sorry, did you have a question or comment?
Also, for teens, there's a good parent-teen curriculum that has a lot of MI. I'm blanking on the name, but it's Margaret Sibley.
Okay.
And a lot of it's on, I think the handouts are free in Spanish online. You have to pay for the book, but
Can you spell her last name?
S-I-B-L-E-Y.
S-I-E.
S-I-B.
B.
L-E-Y.
L-E-Y. And it's teen?
Yeah, it's teen, and it involves a lot of parent management training, adapted for teenagers with an MI component, for parent-child.
Anything else?
All right, so next steps, we're going to collate this together. And we're going to put it on, we're going to email it, but then we're going to have it as a working document on the iDrive. If in all of your spare time, mentally and actual time, you feel like you want to add to it, let's make this a working document, we can possibly revisit it. But one of the things that we would like you to, to discuss on your large talk break is how this could be better, this process. We heard more time. I find that that's generally, most people always want more time. What would that more time look like? So would it be more time doing this exact same thing in this exact same way? Or would it be more time doing something in addition? We have a minute or two if anyone wants to just kind of comment on what this process was like. Was it helpful? Should we do this again in the future?
I really liked it. From a health research perspective, I sort of forget some of these village things, and so I found it really, really helpful.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
I was just going to say, I also really appreciated it. I thought it was great. It's a great process to kind of share ideas that people are doing, to see the things that people are doing. I definitely, it was challenging. I was one of those who was saying about the time, and I'm trying to think for myself, like in the moment, like was it a matter? Yeah, I think for us, it has to do with, I think having the same process for a longer time might have been helpful, because I found that we were doing a lot of brainstorming, and we had to kind of come, maybe it was just our category was hard. There were sort of larger categories already in there that that didn't sort of match. They had sort of different ideas as to what the categories maybe could be, or there were different things going on in our heads. So it took a lot of time for us to kind of put things out there, and then you're in the process of kind of coming to an agreement about how to categorize the different things.
Yeah.
And it's time consuming, you know. And so being able to kind of have a neat product at the end, that was more difficult for us to do with the amount of time that we had.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's so much about, you know, the end product. I think it's great for us to have these resources and to kind of build off of it, but I also think the intervention, it was also the process of like just going through that and talking with each other. Like, how often do we really get a chance to do that in itself? Part of me felt like, do we even have this presentation piece? But that also felt somewhat necessary too, to kind of bring it back around.
I was just thinking of a part 2 to it would be something like, because I think like in an ideal world, everybody wants to do all these things, but like what are the major challenges within each section, and what do people do independently to try to come up with solutions to those challenges?
Yeah.
Because there may be something someone does with school advocacy that's like super successful, and it may be a real big challenge for you or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great point.
If we had assigned the groups a few days ago, so that you had time to really think about what are the resources I want to bring for this particular group, or what are the things that I really want to focus on for this particular topic, would that have been helpful?
I see some yes and some no's.
I mean, I guess maybe for the resources, because it would have been cool if like we brought in, like if I had tailored like resources that I would have used just with kids or something. But then I get nervous about the idea of like, are we supposed to be preparing something before we?
We didn't want people to feel
Yeah,
that.
We didn't want that.